Let me ask you one direct question. If you removed everything you provide, your support, your resources, your effort, your stability, would she still choose you? Or would her interest quietly disappear along with everything you bring? That single question can expose the entire truth about your situation. Because real attraction is not dependent on what you give. It's rooted in how she genuinely feels about you. And if that feeling isn't there, no amount of effort will create it. No amount of giving will manufacture what was never there. This is Liza from Secrets Inside the Mind. And today I'm breaking down 7 psychological signs that a woman doesn't truly love you. She values what you bring into her life. And once you understand this distinction clearly, you'll stop investing where there was never real return. Before we go further, I want a simple answer from you. Yes or no? Have you ever felt like you had to give more just to keep her interested?
Comment yes or no below right now. It might seem small, but it forces you to confront something most men avoid saying out loud. Subscribe right now because this video reveals the psychological patterns most men rationalize away until it's far too late. Section 1. The psychology of providing versus being chosen, the foundation of everything. Before we get into the 7 signs, you need to understand the foundational psychological principle that makes all of them make sense. Because without this understanding, each sign in isolation might feel like an overreaction. Together, they tell a complete and unmistakable story. From a psychological perspective, there are 2 fundamentally different reasons a woman stays in a relationship. The first is genuine emotional attachment. She feels drawn to you as a person, finds you compelling independent of what you provide, and would choose you even if your circumstances change dramatically. The second is transactional comfort. Your presence provides stability, resources, emotional support, or social benefits that improve her life situation, and her continued engagement is primarily sustained by those provisions rather than by genuine desire. These 2 dynamics feel remarkably similar from the inside when you're in them. The difference is almost invisible in the good moments, but it becomes measurable and undeniable at specific pressure points, when you can no longer provide at the same level, when you need support rather than giving it, when commitment is required rather than convenience. Here's the psychological danger that most men fall into. You confuse her presence with her genuine choice of you. You confuse her comfort with her love. You confuse her staying with her truly wanting you. And from a stoic psychological perspective, this confusion is dangerous because it drives a specific behavioral pattern. You invest more, you give more, you sacrifice more, believing that the depth of your investment will eventually generate the depth of her emotional attachment. But attraction doesn't grow from gratitude. The more she associates you with provision, with help, with being her stable support system, the more psychologically difficult it becomes for her to experience genuine desire. You become safe, useful, predictable. And those qualities, as valuable as they are psychologically incompatible with the tension and uncertainty that sustain attraction. Understanding this distinction is the psychological lens through which all 7 signs need to be read. Section 2. Sign 1. She leaves every time things get uncomfortable. The first sign is behavioral and unmistakable once you know what you're looking for. She exits the relationship repeatedly whenever tension, discomfort, or pressure enters the dynamic. Not once because of something genuinely serious. Not occasionally when she's overwhelmed by something outside the relationship. But as a consistent pattern, whenever there's meaningful conflict, disagreement, or emotional difficulty, her instinct is to pull away, shut down, or disappear rather than lean in and work through it. From a psychological standpoint, a woman who is genuinely emotionally invested in a relationship experiences difficulty very differently because she sees something worth protecting. Her response to friction is to lean toward resolution, to push through the discomfort because losing the connection would cost her something real. That psychological cost of potential loss is what drives her to stay and work through difficulty rather than exit until it becomes comfortable again. But when that deep attachment isn't present, when the relationship is primarily experienced as something she's in as long as it serves her, Her instinct when things become uncomfortable is completely different. She exits, because if she's not deeply attached, the psychological cost of temporary absence is low. She can leave, let the tension dissipate, and return when the relationship is comfortable again. And importantly, she can do this repeatedly because the pattern has never produced real consequences for her. Here's the psychological pattern you need to examine in your own situation. Does she stay and work toward resolution when conflict arises? Or does she disappear and return later, sometimes days later, as if the unresolved issue simply didn't exist? Because those two responses reveal completely different levels of genuine emotional investment. Here's the psychological damage this pattern produces over time. You start adapting to it. You begin holding back honest opinions. You walk more carefully around topics you know might trigger her exit. You avoid conflict not because things are good, but because you've learned the cost of honesty is her temporary but painful disappearance. And gradually, you're not in a relationship anymore. You're managing her emotional comfort level to prevent a behavior she should never have been allowed to repeat without consequence. The psychological line that matters here: a woman who genuinely sees a future with you is afraid to lose you. If she's not afraid to lose you, if exiting is easy and repeated, that tells you everything you need to know about the depth of her attachment. Section 3. Sign 2. She becomes vague when commitment comes up. The second sign is what happens when you introduce the subject of genuine commitment and a shared future. This is the most psychologically revealing pressure point in any relationship, because it's the one moment where genuine feeling can no longer hide behind comfortable ambiguity. From a psychological standpoint, a woman who is truly emotionally attached to you doesn't experience commitment as a threatening or overwhelming concept. She might want to discuss timing, circumstances, practical details, but the direction, the fundamental orientation toward building something together with you specifically, is clear. There's no confusion in her energy, no emotional withdrawal from the topic. She leans toward the idea because committing to you represents something she wants. But when that genuine attachment isn't present, something very different happens the moment commitment enters the conversation. The language becomes deliberately vague. I don't know. I need more time. Let's not rush this. I'm still figuring things out. And you interpret those words as caution, as maturity, as someone who takes commitment seriously and doesn't want to make a mistake. But here's the psychological reality most men resist accepting. When a woman knows she wants you, she doesn't need years to figure it out, while continuing to benefit from everything you provide in the present. Certainty doesn't drag. Certainty shows up clearly, even if it needs some practical planning around timing and circumstances. Here's what her vagueness is actually communicating psychologically. She's keeping her options open. She's allowing herself to continue receiving everything the relationship provides without closing the door on other possibilities. And the specific position this puts you in is the most psychologically expensive one possible. You're investing more deeply into a future with someone who is still genuinely uncertain whether you belong in hers. Here's the psychological trap this creates. You respond to her uncertainty by increasing your investment. You try to become the more obvious choice through more effort, more consistency, more support.
But you're not becoming more attractive. You're reinforcing the dynamic where you provide and she remains in the comfortable position of deciding at her own pace with no real psychological cost to her ambiguity. The psychological line that matters. When a woman is genuinely in love with you, commitment doesn't feel like pressure. It feels like alignment, like you're both moving in the same direction together. If it feels like pressure to her, it's because she's not sure she wants to go in that direction with you specifically. If you're recognizing these first two signs in your situation, comment below right now. Tell me which one resonates most. Like this video and subscribe, because the next signs reveal the subtler psychological patterns that are even harder to see when you're inside them. Her interest appeared after your value increased.
The third sign requires honest examination of the timeline of her interest. specifically when it first became genuine and what was happening in your life at that moment. From a psychological standpoint, this requires a level of honesty most men resist because the alternative interpretation that she saw something in you before you were established feels better. But the psychological evidence of this sign is in the timing. A woman who is genuinely attracted to you as a person sees you before the results. She connects with who you are, your character, your energy, your specific way of being, independent of your life circumstances. Her attraction is present before the external markers of success, stability, and provision are established. She's drawn to the potential she senses in you rather than responding to the concrete benefits you now provide. But when interest appears primarily after your value increased, when her engagement became noticeably warmer after your income grew, your social status elevated, your resources became more visible, your life became more convenient, that timing is not coincidence, it's psychological data. Here's the subtle mechanism that makes this sign so easy to miss in the moment. When her interest grows as your value increases, it feels like validation. It feels like evidence that your hard work and development paid off. You tell yourself she finally sees what you bring. And that interpretation feels good enough that you don't examine the underlying psychology. But here's what's actually happening from a psychological standpoint. Her attraction was never rooted in you as a man. It was rooted in what your life could provide her. And the fundamental psychological problem with that kind of attraction is its instability. It's directly dependent on the continuation of those provisions. If your circumstances change, if you go through a difficult period, if you need support rather than providing it, you'll feel the psychological shift in her engagement immediately, because the thing she's actually attracted to has become less available. Here's the most psychologically accurate framing of this sign. She didn't choose you. She chose the version of life you could provide her, and upgrades, in the way she unconsciously categorizes what you represent, can always be replaced by a better option. Section 5, Sign 4. The relationship runs in repeated cycles of chaos. The fourth sign is the one that's most likely to be mistaken for passion, and that misidentification is exactly why it's so psychologically damaging. From a psychological standpoint, genuine emotional connection deepens over time. It stabilizes. It becomes more resilient to external pressure because both people are increasingly invested in what they're building together. The natural trajectory of real love is toward greater security, not toward repeated collapse and reconstruction. But what many men experience and mistake for passionate connection is a cycle. She disconnects when the relationship becomes inconvenient, then reappears when her situation changes and access to you becomes desirable again. Things feel good briefly. Then something triggers a collapse. She exits, returns. The cycle repeats, and each time she returns, the brief relief of her reappearance feels like proof that the connection is real. Here's the psychological truth about what's actually happening in this cycle. You are being conditioned. Every time she exits and returns to find you still available, still welcoming, still willing to reset and try again, she learns that there are no genuine consequences to her behavior. She can withdraw access whenever she wants and reclaim it whenever it suits her. And you absorb the emotional cost of each cycle while she experiences minimal psychological consequence. Here's the most damaging psychological effect this produces over time. Your standards shift without you consciously deciding to change them. You begin tolerating behavior that you would have immediately rejected at the beginning of the relationship. You start interpreting her return as evidence of her love rather than as evidence of her comfort with the pattern you've allowed to establish. The psychological line you need to internalize: consistency is what genuine love looks like in behavior. Chaos is what the absence of genuine commitment feels like. If you're constantly in recovery mode, always adjusting, always waiting, always rebuilding after the most recent collapse, you're not in a stable relationship. You're in a cycle that is slowly redefining your sense of what you deserve. Section 6, Sign 5. Her emotional availability is conditional on what you provide. The fifth sign is subtler than the previous four, but psychologically reveals the same underlying dynamic from a different angle. Her emotional presence and warmth directly tracks your provision level rather than existing independently of it. From a psychological standpoint, this means her engagement, her warmth, her interest, her attention, her affectionate behavior rises when things are going well for you and drops when they're not. When you're providing at a high level, she's present, engaged, warm. When you're going through a difficult period, when your resources or energy or capacity is reduced, her emotional availability diminishes. This pattern is psychologically significant because in a relationship grounded in genuine emotional attachment, her warmth and care for you as a person exists relatively independently of your current performance and provision level. She might be impacted by external stressors, but her fundamental orientation toward you, her care, her desire, her emotional presence, doesn't directly track your ability to provide in the way a conditional arrangement would. When it does track your provision level, when you can feel the correlation between what you're giving and how available she is, you're not experiencing love. You're experiencing a managed relationship where her engagement is calibrated to what she's receiving. Here's the most psychologically revealing version of this sign. Think about the times when you needed support rather than provided it. When you were struggling financially, professionally, emotionally, was she more present, more engaged, more emotionally available because you needed it? Or did her availability reduce proportionally to your capacity to provide? Because that question, and the honest answer, reveals the actual foundation of her engagement with you. Section 7. Sign 6. You feel like you constantly have to maintain a certain level. The sixth sign is internal. It lives in how the relationship actually feels to inhabit rather than in any specific behavior. And it's one of the most psychologically honest indicators of whether you're in something real. From a psychological standpoint, when genuine mutual love and attraction is present, you don't feel a constant pressure to maintain a performance level to preserve her interest. You can have a bad month. You can go through a difficult period. You can show vulnerability or need support. And the foundation of the connection remains intact because her attachment is to you rather than to what you're currently providing. But when the foundation of her interest is primarily your provision, you feel something specific, a constant low-level pressure to maintain the circumstances that keep her engaged. You can't fully relax into the relationship because some part of you knows that your value in her eyes is contingent on your continued delivery.
You become reluctant to show vulnerability because you've sensed, correctly, that she responds to your strength and stability, but not to your difficulty. Here's the psychological cost of this over time. You become emotionally isolated within the relationship itself. You can't bring your full self, including your struggles, your doubts, your moments of difficulty, because those parts of you don't produce the response you need from her. So you perform, you maintain, you protect the image of provision that keeps her engaged. And the psychological tragedy of that position is this. You're in a relationship that requires you to be less than fully yourself to maintain it. And any connection that requires the suppression of your authentic experience is not a place where genuine intimacy can exist, regardless of how long it continues.
If you're recognizing this sign in your own relationship, if you feel that constant pressure to maintain a level, comment below right now. Tell me how long you've been carrying that weight. Like this video and subscribe because the final sign is the deepest one and the most important psychologically. Section 8. Sign 7. You've been giving with an unconscious expectation of love in return. The seventh and most psychologically honest sign is not about her behavior. It's about yours, specifically the psychological framework you've been operating from without fully recognizing it. From a psychological standpoint, many men who find themselves in the dynamic this video has been describing are operating under an unconscious belief. If I give enough, sacrifice enough, prove my value enough, she will eventually feel something genuine for me. Love can be created through sustained investment. This belief feels like generosity on the surface. It feels like dedication and care. But underneath the giving is a silent negotiation. You're investing in hopes that it will convert into the emotional attachment you're looking for. Here's the psychological truth that makes this so costly. Love cannot be earned through provision. A woman can appreciate everything you do for her, benefit deeply from your support, rely on your presence, enjoy your company, and still not feel genuine desire or deep emotional attachment. Those two things, appreciation and attraction, are psychologically separate, and confusing them is what keeps men locked in the provision dynamic long past the point where the psychological evidence is clear. Here's the specific psychological damage this unconscious negotiation produces. When she doesn't respond to your investment the way you hoped, when the depth of her emotional return doesn't match the depth of your giving, you don't conclude that the dynamic is transactional. You conclude that you haven't given enough yet, so you give more. And the cycle perpetuates itself, driven by the belief that eventually enough investment will generate genuine desire. Here's the most psychologically honest reframe I can offer. Real attraction, the kind that generates genuine desire, emotional security, and chosen commitment, is not something you earn through sustained provision. It's something a woman either feels for you or she doesn't. Your provision can maintain access to her presence while that feeling is absent, but it cannot manufacture the feeling itself. The moment you genuinely understand this, not intellectually but psychologically, your entire orientation shifts. You stop trying to earn something that cannot be earned. You start evaluating whether what's present is real rather than trying to create what isn't. Final section: the psychological truth and what you do with it. Now that we've covered all 7 signs, let me bring everything together with the most honest psychological conclusion I can offer. Look at the full picture. She showed up when it benefited her. She left when things got uncomfortable. She hesitated when commitment was required. She stayed while you continued to provide. And every time you gave more, you made it easier for her to remain without ever genuinely choosing you. Here's the psychological summary of what that actually means. You were never in a relationship grounded in mutual desire. You were in a situation where you provided value and she accepted it. You weren't her partner in the way you understood the word. You were her stability, her safety net, her convenient option for as long as those provisions continued. From a psychological standpoint, this realization is painful not because it reflects poorly on your value as a person, but because it exposes how long you accepted a dynamic that was never going to produce what you actually needed from it. And it raises an important question about why, about what belief drove you to keep investing in the face of clear psychological evidence that genuine reciprocation wasn't present. Here's the most important psychological work that follows from recognizing these 7 signs. Not the work of getting her to love you, because you now understand why that's not something provision can manufacture, but the work of rebuilding your standards from the inside out, of understanding what genuine mutual desire actually feels like versus what managed convenience feels like, of recognizing your own value as something you carry rather than something you continuously demonstrate to earn someone's continued presence. Here's the psychological line that changes everything. Real love doesn't need to be negotiated. It doesn't require sustained performance on one side to maintain itself. It doesn't leave you constantly uncertain about where you stand.
If you have to earn it, if you have to maintain a specific level of provision to keep her engaged, it was never genuine love. It was a comfortable arrangement, and you deserve something real, not an arrangement, not managed access to someone who stays because leaving would cost her the benefits. Something where the foundation is genuine desire, where you are chosen not for what you provide, but for who you actually are. That clarity, as uncomfortable as it is to reach, is where the real shift begins. Not when you finally give enough to make her love you, but when you understand clearly enough to stop trying. Have you ever been in a situation where you gave everything and still felt like it wasn't enough? Comment below right now. Tell me how long you stayed in it before you saw the pattern clearly. Be honest. That honesty is the beginning of genuine change. Like this video if it gave you the psychological clarity you needed.
Share it with a man who is currently over-investing in someone who has never truly chosen him. And subscribe to Secrets Inside the Mind, because this level of psychological honesty about what real love looks like versus what managed convenience feels like, about why provision never manufactures genuine desire, is the understanding that protects you from the most costly mistake men make in relationships. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.